Okay, my presentation today is about libraries supporting multilingual populations. In today's presentation, I have 3 essential questions that emerge from my scenario. Question 1, how is the Kaimuki Public Library providing services to multilingual populations? Question 2, how have Hawaii Public Libraries served multilingual populations in the past? Question 3, how can Hawaii Public Libraries consistently provide quality services to multilingual populations? Now, the first essential question is focused on an interaction I had with a branch manager from the Kaimuki Public Library during a presentation in my LIS610 course. Through my research on EL English learner populations in Hawaii, I knew that nearly 1 out of every 4 students in the Kaimuki area were ELs, which means they're not yet proficient in English. This area has the 3rd highest population of ELs in the state, which is also higher than the national average. There are 36 different languages represented in this area, but the top 2 are Japanese and Chuukese. With this knowledge about the community, I asked the question, how is the Kaimuki Public Library providing services to its multilingual population? Although she was open to suggestions, she stated that there were no current support, services, or outreach for their multilingual population. She had not realized that such a large population of her community were English learners. After speaking with several public librarians in Hawaii, I realized there seems to be no solid plan in place for providing services to immigrant populations in the community. My stance is that there is a strong need for research-based guidelines that all public libraries should implement when servicing the multilingual populations. The consistency of actions taken by librarians will help ensure that immigrant populations are supported no matter the library they may seek help from. Libraries can also connect with one another and share creative resources, ideas, and effective programming for different cultural populations. Through my research, there seems to be a history of disconnect between Hawaii libraries and the services provided to community members. So, how have public libraries in Hawaii served multilingual populations in the past? This is my essential question number 2. I decided to focus on one particular multilingual population to track, Japanese immigrants. One of the best ways English learners build an understanding of the English language is through having a strong literacy foundation in their native language. Having books in a person's native language improves the chances of them making connections from their current understanding of language to the English language. This history illustrates the struggles the Japanese community in Hawaii took in order to have Japanese books in Hawaii libraries. We begin our timeline of Hawaii Public Library services to Japanese immigrants with the Honolulu Library and Reading Room, which was given financial support and personal book collections from the Hawaii royalty at the time in 1879. At this time, there were understandably no Japanese books in the library. In 1909, the Honolulu Library and Reading Room expanded to create the Library of Hawaii with the help of a $10,000 grant by the Carnegie Foundation. The library acquired books in Russian, Greek, French, and Latin, but very few in Japanese. It was requested that more materials be provided in Japanese, but the request was rejected because of a lack of budget. In 1922, the library had over 50,000 items in their collection. The world language selection included 411 items in French, 219 items in German, 41 items in Spanish. Now at the time in Hawaii, about 40% of Hawaii's population was Japanese. Do you know how many books they purchased in Japanese? Well, it was less than 24 Japanese books, of which little money was spent on them, which meant the quality of the books were not the best. The Japanese population decided to take action of their own. Pre-World War II, 41 Japanese bookstores opened to the public. The bookstore you see in this picture is over 100 years old and is still in operation today. In 1936, the library finally allowed Japanese books on the condition that the Japanese community donate the books and pay for a custodian to oversee them themselves. This collection was named the Oriental Collection. Once World War II began, Hawaii had one of the largest ethnic communities outside of the Japanese Empire, but due to tensions, book selling abruptly ended for a period of time. Many Japanese citizens showed their allegiance to the US by enlisting. The soldier in this recruitment poster is actually my grandfather. Now, today, Japanese books can be found in libraries, but some say they came too late. Over 100 years have passed since the arrival of the first generation of Japanese immigrants who needed those books. There are now new first generation immigrants living in our communities, which collections are now lacking. So history brings us back to today. How can the Hawaii Public Library consistently provide quality services to multilingual populations? Through my research on effective services libraries are providing to this population, I found their actions synthesized through one document promoted by the ALA. It's called the Ethnic and Multicultural Information Exchange Table, or EMERT. In this document are a set of guidelines on library outreach to new immigrants, which is created by diversity, literacy specialists, librarians, and professors. The main goal of this document is the development of library services and programming that facilitate recent immigrants' inclusion and participation into the broader society, while also the preservation and promotion of their distinct cultural and linguistic heritages. Now, in this document, there are 6 guidelines supporting new immigrants. The first one being community needs assessment. Librarians should get a general idea of who is in their community. They provided a list of websites that could show this, but the ones I'm going to show you are the best sources I found for Hawaii. So the first one is Hawaii DXP, and this is information about the L's and DOE schools in different complexes around the state. The next one is called Statistical Atlas, and it shows maps of where particular ethnic backgrounds live. People with particular ethnic backgrounds live in different areas of a district. Now, you could use this information to pass out translated flyers, promote services, or create targeted outreach. The US Census Bureau has information about different communities in Hawaii, but I found that it did have a limited amount of information on immigrants in the country. The next part of the guideline is collection development. So collection developments provide important means for knowledge sharing, literacy development, and community building around cultural diversity. The picture in this slide represents a study from the University of Wisconsin showing how diverse children's books were in 2018. And as you can tell, the data is showing that the books weren't very diverse. Half of them being Caucasian characters, 27% being animals or other, 10% African American, 7% Asian Pacific Islander, 5% Latino, and 1% American Indians. Now, when you're looking into collection development, the first step is developing in a collection is conducting a poll of new immigrant users and their reading interests. 2 is to create an advisory board or committee that includes members of the immigrant communities. When you do this, they can advise on subjects and genres in selection discussions. You also want to make sure you collaborate with foreign material bookstores, publishers, and distributors, and choose diverse ones rather than only the largest. Okay, number 3 is programming and services. So you want to collaborate, of course, with the local organizations and institutes working with immigrants. In this picture, the library invited a guest from a science museum to present science experiments using recycled items. You also want to make sure that you provide active learning opportunities where active language learning is happening, like conversations with others and introducing vocabulary. It said that ELs need to learn between 6 to 10 English words during each lesson in order to catch up with their English-speaking peers. Okay, you will also want to keep the activities fun when you're programming, organizing your programs, providing information on leisure and recreation. Sometimes providing activities less language intense can be daunting for immigrants, can be less daunting for immigrant families. You want to offer citizenship classes and other information relevant to civic participation. And recent immigrants might lack transportation or have a limited knowledge of public transportation systems or struggle with the costs that transportation incurs. So you might want to consider taking library services to respective communities. Okay, the next guideline is facilities. You want to make sure they're comfortable, open, colorful spaces with multicultural collections and cultural programming, just like how you see in this picture here. The next guideline is staffing and personnel. So one thing you want to make sure when you're developing your staff is having them understand the importance of building connections. Focusing on building relationships with different groups and individuals requires socialization and social networking. You also might want to consider hiring professional and support staff with the same or similar cultural and linguistic backgrounds of recent immigrant groups in your community, and even recruiting some of those immigrants to volunteer inside of the library. Okay, and the last guideline is community engagement. So library staff will need to make the initial effort to establish contact. Relationships can be developed through collaboration and partnerships with other community groups and organizations. So that's the overall understanding of community engagement. So what does that look like? Okay, so when we look at organizations, you want to be able to develop contacts with community leaders of targeted ethnic, linguistic, and cultural groups. I found this website here. It's called kaimokihawaii.com. And their goal is to bring the Kaimoki community together. So it could help with developing contacts within a community. The next thing you want to make sure to have is translations. So provide programming and publicity in English and in the native languages of a local community immigrants. And you want to ask partners in the community to help you distribute these throughout the community. You do want to present outreach activities in non-library but familiar alternative locations such as community centers and religious organizations like churches. You may also want to participate in the life of the community by becoming involved with or initiating local events such as festivals and other cultural activities. Near Kaimoki, there's a Japanese cultural center. Since the Japanese immigrant group is one of the largest groups in the area, this would be a great place to meet and learn about the community. And the last part of community engagement is creating a shared vision. Working together with community members to develop a project that you and your community are interested in and creating this goal together. So the same website, kaimokihawaii.com, connects you with other local nonprofit organizations within the community that could potentially lead to a community-related project. Now, so these are the 6 guidelines I and the ALA would suggest that libraries begin in order to implement support for their multilingual communities. But it does start with knowing your community, which would benefit any library in providing services. Okay. These are my resources. Many of the resources I do have are linked on the pictures of each slide. And these are my references. And let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.